When considering genetics, it's important to understand where it all came from, how did it start, how do we know what we know now, and what does it mean for what we currently understand. So, Mendelian genetics is named after a monk named Mendel. So, we're going to start with the story. Once upon a time, on a pea plantation, okay, but seriously, once upon a time, there was an Austrian monk named Gregor Mendel. And monks at the time were generally educated, and they were the scientists of the time. And Gregor was very interested in gardening, in addition to math and other things that he studied. So, gardening, though, was his passion. And one of the things that he grew was pea plants. And as he grew those pea plants, as in like sugar snap peas, as he grew those pea plants, he noticed some interesting characteristics about them. So he decided to set up an experiment. And one of them was he's going to cross two different plants, meaning that he's going to cross pollinate them because plants mate with, using pollen. So he crossed a short pea plant with a tall pea plant, meaning that he mated those two types of plants. And when he crossed that short pea plant with a tall pea plant, he ended up with all tall pea plants. Now, in reality, he was crossing thousands of pea plants, but for simplicity's sake, when you look at one of the short pea plants and one of the tall pea plants that he crossed or he bred, his end result was all tall pea plants, so 100% tall pea plants. So what does that mean? He wanted to figure out where did the short pea plant trait go. So he tried to explain that using what he called factors, and he called the tall factor a dominant factor, and the short factor the recessive factor. So he considered the term short to be a factor and the term tall to be a factor, but he considered tall to be dominant and short to be recessive. And then he wondered what's going to happen if he lets these tall pea plants pollinate, meaning what's going to happen if they self-pollinate. The tall pea plant pollinates the tall pea plant on its own because pea plants can do that. And when he did that, now he ended up with a ratio that ended up being three tall pea plants to one short pea plant. So all of a sudden, that short trait reappeared, and he wondered why. So how did he go from having the short disappear, and then all of a sudden having the short appear again? So he tried to explain this. And 30,000 pea plants later, he thinks he figured it out. And because of that, we call him the father of genetics, because he was the first to explain what happened to those factors that were appearing and disappearing and why. So let's look at what he discovered. So there are factors that control traits. He called them factors. We call them genes. So we know that our genes control our traits, our characteristics. And genes come in different forms or versions. We call them either dominant or recessive. So what are the different versions of genes? Genes have different versions. You have two versions per gene, one that you get from your mom and one that you get from your dad. One from your dad and one from your mom. And those versions that you get from your mom and your dad can either be dominant or recessive. So when you receive a dominant trait, that trait will always appear. When you get a dominant version of a trait, that version of the trait will always appear. For example, the tall pea plant height was the dominant trait, so it was always appearing when it was present. A recessive trait can be hidden or masked by the dominant version. So the short pea plant trait was there, it was present in those tall pea plants, but it was hidden, and it didn't come out again until the dominant trait wasn't there to hide it. It was only recessive traits present when the short pea plant would appear. We'll go into significantly more detail about that when we are in class. But Another thing to keep in mind is how do we represent this as we're writing it down? So the different versions we represent using single letters. So a dominant trait is written as a capital letter. A capital letter symbolizes that trait. For example, T symbolizes tall plant height. It could be any letter. It could be a capital P or a capital S or a capital K. Any letter works, but as long as it's capital, it's representing a dominant trait. A recessive trait, or the one that can be hidden, is represented with a lowercase letter. So a lowercase t would represent that short pea plant height. So notice that the T and tall is where it generally came from, but it's still a T even though the word short doesn't start with T. So we use the same letter to represent a particular gene or trait. So we get different versions of a gene and they're written as single letters, but each of us has two versions for each gene in our body, and we're wondering where that comes from. So those versions come from your parents. You get one version from your mom and one version from your dad. And together we call those a gene pair because 2 equals a pair. We call this gene pair your gene code because it's written as 2 single letters, a pair of single letters, and it represents something. So we call it a code. So it's our gene code. And the possible gene codes for Mendel's pea plants were capital T, capital T, capital T, lowercase t, or lowercase t, lowercase t. And what does that mean for Mendel's pea plants? Well, your gene codes can either have same letter combinations, capital, capital, or lowercase, lowercase, or they could have different letter combinations, capital and a lowercase. And the gene code that's what is actually providing the instructions for what your body should do and what it should create. So your body follows the instructions of the genotype, which is your gene code. Your body follows that gene code and creates your actual trait or your physical appearance. So what does that actually look like? I'm going to go back and review that one more time. So you get a pair of genes from mom and dad that is called your gene code. That gene code is your set of instructions, kind of like computer coding gives instructions to software or to the computer. Gene code gives instructions to your body, and it tells your body what to do and what to create. So your body follows those instructions of it's technically called a genotype. We'll call it our gene code, and it creates your actual trait or your physical appearance. So here's what this actually looks like when you put it into action in an organism. So looking at Mendel's pea plants, there's several different plants that showed up. So there were 3 possible codes. One of the gene codes was a capital T, capital T. And because there was 2 dominant traits or dominant genes, the actual trait that showed up was tall. The dominant was tall, and that's what shows through. Another possibility for the gene code was capital T, lowercase t. And in this case, the plant read that as being tall because the capital T hides the lowercase t. Again, the dominant hides the recessive. So the plant shows up tall, even though it's carrying that recessive trait. And the gene code for the short plant is lowercase t, lowercase t. The only way the short pea plant could show up was by not having any dominant genes present. So we have 2 lowercase, 2 recessive genes, and that coded for the short trait in the pea plant. We'll do a lot of practice with this in class, but ultimately, capital letters or genes are represented by letters, and those genes code for traits or physical appearances. When you have a gene pair, you get one from mom and one from dad, and in the end, those gene pairs code for an actual trait.